I'm Isabel Stainsby, and I'm reading from The Listener by Petra Stehlíková. We'd already been kneeling for an hour on the stone floor in the hall where the feast had taken place the evening before, while we and the others waited for the captain and his first adjutant. This time neither of the men even bowed. They walked up to the fire and merely struck their breastbones with their fists and bent their heads slightly. He was standing at one of the many large windows lining the south wall of the hall, encircled by his bodyguards. Could the great Faya of Amaria be afraid? "Fire, Boyan," said the captain, sitting down with his adjutant at the great table on the regent's nod. "I appreciate your invitation to lunch." Those words roared in my ears. In actual fact, the voice roared, not the words, the captain's voice. The master's sudden sharp movement indicated that he recognized it too. Even though the captain's voice was now recognizably more cheerful, there could be no doubt. That night he had been shrouded in darkness, and the only thing I could see was his stammer and the hand grasping the crossbow. But he was the one who had saved us in the night that time. That voice was unmistakable, firm, used to giving orders to be carried out immediately, a voice emanating power. But what on earth was the captain of the 25 doing in Amaria several days before the entire group arrived? Alone, with no retinue, in the middle of the night, in the poor quarter? This person, this most famous man in the Duval Mountains, whom even the Fire of Amaria wanted as an ally, had a secret. "I have a gift for you." The captain suddenly tilted his head back and he burst into loud laughter. "Aha! You've already heard about the dagger from Samuel in Rokos. It really is breathtaking. The vitriers there have surpassed themselves. I have something better for you, much better." The Fire's hands, clenched into fists, were trembling as he made a huge effort to persuade the captain that his gift was inimitable, something unique. The regent snapped his fingers loudly, and before the sound could fade away, the master was standing at the massive table of pale wood and carefully placing my creation onto it. Then he crept back to me. With a heavy heart, I watched someone so gifted crawl along the floor, at his age, just to stay alive. "Here you are, Joel." Boyan gently pulled back the velvet and reached for the sword, but didn't touch it. "I know how fascinated you are by all vitrier weapons." "Yes, I am," the captain confirmed, standing to see what the black fabric was covering. "Vitriite is a miracle." Their eyes met again. As soon as the captain bent his hazel eyes to the sword, Boyan focused on us. "If you've let me down, you're dead," he said to us wordlessly. My forehead was damp and my hands clammy. If the captain refused the gift, then not just the master would die, but so would I suddenly realized. As the captain slowly pushed the velvet aside, I could barely breathe. He was taking his time. Tensely, I watched as his eyebrows rippled with incomprehension. Then he pushed the fabric away with a single sharp movement. I trembled and swallowed with difficulty. The captain ran his gaze over the weapon. "A sword of black vitriite?" That was the first thing the captain's adjutant had said. His voice sounded amused. "I don't know how to interpret this, Boyan," breathed the captain. He put his hands on his breast, took a step away, and monitored the fire through half-closed eyes. "How unusual. Even the lowest soldier in your army owns such a sword. I would have been less surprised if you'd given me a necklace." At the last sentence, the captain frowned, while the Fire's face reddened, and the veins stood out on his forehead. He was furious. "You haven't even tried it yet, and you're already mocking it," he attacked the captain. "I rather thought that you were mocking me." "Try it," ordered the Fire harshly. However, when he saw the threatening glance of the captain's adjutant, his voice broke. "Please." The head of the 25 hesitated briefly, then took the sword into his hands, and he and his adjutant began to examine it more closely. They were obviously looking for something exceptional. They passed the sword between them, weighed it in their hands, studied its sharp edges. They tested its balance. Meanwhile, I was drowning in my own stat. Well, he began at last. If I wasn't already kneeling, I would have fallen to my knees. At least your vitriers have excelled themselves. At first glance, this is perfect. But you know what will happen with it when I cut something with it, don't you? Boyan, I'm used to handling much better swords. This one will break at the first blow. Prove that, Boyan challenged him, his voice shaking. He must have realized that, if we had failed, he would be a laughingstock. The captain grasped the sword firmly and cut through the air with it a few times. His hand guided the weapon surely and directly. Then he went up to one of the chairs around the table, and the sword easily cut it into 2 halves. Astonished, he looked at the weapon in his hand. Then he turned to his adjutant, and ultimately to the fire. Impressive, he judged quietly, while looking around for a suitable object. His eyes fell on a small stone table beside the wall. In 2 steps he was beside it, and he swung. He didn't even need to expend much strength before the table, again, was cut in 2. The pieces fell to the ground with a loud thump. His eyes glowed, and he began to run around the room, looking for another victim for the sword. While still playing with his new weapon, he headed for the marble steps where, yesterday, the Fire had sat with his family and welcomed his soldiers. May I destroy the steps to your pedestal, Boyan? He asked jeeringly, yet with enthusiasm. The Fire was again forced to suppress his anger. Be my guest, Joel. The captain knelt, raised the sword high above his head, and sharply struck the stone with it. Silence. I watched the Fire smile with spiteful joy. The sword cut through the step and sank deep into it. The captain shook it briefly. When he finally succeeded in extricating the weapon, drops of sweat had appeared on his forehead. He stood up and thoughtfully examined the black mineral. Just a week ago it had been an ordinary lump of stone, yet with a few days of work I had transformed it into a miracle that enchanted even the captain of the 25 himself. With slow steps he returned to the table and carefully laid the sword down onto the velvet. The Fire, sufficiently emboldened by this turn of events, walked with his hands behind his back around the table. So, what do you say? I have good vitriers in Amaria, don't you think? Aren't my vitriers the best? Could the Rogos vitriers do this? The captain only blinked rapidly. This time he ignored the questions. The Fire pushed him into a corner and, unfortunately, enjoyed his victory. Who cut this sword? Asked the leader of the 25. The Fire turned in the direction where the master and I were still kneeling. I swallowed, but my mouth was dry. I'd felt better when nobody was paying any attention to us. My vitrier master and his apprentice, he replied loudly. I heard approaching footsteps and shut my eyes in fear. Who really made this sword? Said the captain's voice beside me. Even though I was kneeling, I still jumped. My apprentice, sir, revealed the master in a trembling voice. He, too, was uncomfortable with the captain's sudden attention. He knelt beside me and tried to speak in the humble tone required of him. He's very gifted, sir. Nobody else would have been able to complete so difficult a task. It would have been stupid in the extreme to lie to the captain. We had recognized him, and he must have recognized us.